Yeah, the Puritans were fantastic, absolutely fantastic illustrators. Why? How did they get to be that way? And I'm convinced it's because they love their people so much that they wrestle with how do you get through to your people. So they'd be very opposed against illustrations for illustration's sake or for time fillers. Illustrations must flow naturally out of the text, they would say. And so you never find Puritans going down bunny trails, do you? They're focused. But they get such suitable illustrations. So they said illustrations are like windows in a dark room. It let in light. And or in a stuffy room, it gives you better breathing. And when people hear an illustration, they sit up and listen. Boys and girls sit up and listen. So they're great attention getters as well. But illustrations are designed to make what you're saying from a two-dimensional sermon into three-dimensional. They put pictures in the minds of people. People can identify with them. Now, when I was first a preacher, I thought I'm going to teach so clearly and so powerfully. I'm going to raise people above this need, this crazy need for illustrations, right? Well, then with the few illustrations I used, I noticed that as people came to me after the sermon, they're always talking about the illustration. and children would understand the illustrations when they didn't understand much of the sermon. So I think in my own ministry, not consciously so much, almost subconsciously, I just kind of went through a metamorphosis here and moved over to more illustrations in sermons. And I actually think, even though no Puritan said this, but Spurgeon did, and I think Puritans did something similar to this. Spurgeon said, after you've got your sermon notes prepared, go back and look over your sermon. And I forget if he said 4 or 5. You should have at least 4 or 5 of these window illustrations in your sermon. Now, sometimes the illustration can be many times, just from the Bible. Say a colorful illustration taken from one of the colorful stories about Joseph, for example. It can be a great illustration because everybody in the church understands it. So the Puritans would do that a lot as well. But they went to Greek mythology. They were all over the place with their illustrations, but always always applying the text in a powerful way. So that when you finished the illustration, reading the illustration or hearing the illustration, you just sat back and said, wow, yeah, that really brings the truth home, that point home to the heart. So that's a skill. And unfortunately, there aren't many good illustration books. I tried using some of those, 7,700 illustrations for the preacher. They just don't work for me. So illustrations from your own experience, illustrations from church history, not be careful with your own experience, but illustrations from maybe experiences I've had with other people of God, talking about what they experienced can be powerful. But you have to be careful there too. You don't want people to feel like you're not confidential, so you don't take any examples from your own church, or very few. So there's borderline areas that you don't want to cross, or at least not very often. But there's a wealth of illustrations, contemporary illustrations about what's going on in the world today, illustrations from some of the liberal arts, of characters or things that people will know, illustrations of poor examples. Think of the Bible, Caleb is a wonderful example, but then you get Judas Iscariot and other poor examples. So you can use all of these things in preaching. And you're right, illustrations like that bring color into the sermon as well. And it puts fizz in the Coke. It makes the sermon come alive. And so, yeah, you don't want to overload your sermon with the illustrations, but when you make a point, I say to the students today, when I began teaching 30-some years ago, I said, don't ever go more than 15 minutes in a sermon without some really practical application or some illustration. Today, I say, don't go more than 7 minutes, because people can't listen to straight doctrine very long. You've got to bring it home to their life or to their heart, because their attention span is so short. partly due to modern media where things are just going like that, you know? So we can't preach like the Puritans that way and have 15, 20 minutes of solid doctrine. We need illustrations.